Hello, I'm Diana Reif, the Artistic Director of the Charleston Literary Festival. I'd like to welcome our speakers, audience, and donors. If the past 4 to 18 months has taught us anything, it is that books and their authors, whether classical or contemporary, really matter. In trying times, readers turn to books for insights into the human condition, for the opportunity to be transported to other worlds, for ideas, for arguments, for inspiration, for experiencing the impossible, for laughter, and for the release of tears. The festival will provide the opportunity to engage with a galaxy of literary and artistic stars, as well as up-and-coming writers who are making waves. We have a far-flung cast list featuring authors from all over the United States, as well as the United Kingdom and elsewhere. Whether they're talking about former literary trailblazers, or gene editing, or human rights, or popular culture, or feminism, or medieval nuns, or groundbreaking films, or innumerable other subjects, they have one thing in common: the ability of compelling stories to linger in our imaginations. We're grateful to all our speakers, whether virtual or in person, for sharing their talents. Please thank them by purchasing their books. The festival couldn't happen without a committed team and board. We would like to thank our donors, both private and public, who generously make the festival possible. The College of Charleston, our academic partner, has been an invaluable source of support. It is no accident that the festival takes place in Charleston, a prime destination with a progressive literary and artistic tradition. I hope that you enjoy all the events and that they make you think and dream afresh.
Welcome to What Women Want. Thank you to Judy Cornwell to sponsoring this session. I'm Suzanne Pollack, the Director of Development and the Party Planner for the festival. Lisa Taddeo spent 8 years and thousands of hours tracking the women whose stories comprised 3 women, even moving to the towns that they lived in to better understand their lives. So the resulting book it was the literary sensation in 2020, and it's becoming a television series. Her subsequent novel, Animal, features a damaged anti-heroine seeking redemption. Lisa has contributed to New York Magazine, Esquire, Elle, Glamour, and many other publications. Her short stories have won 2 Pushcart Prizes, and Lisa lives with her husband and daughter in New England. Welcome to Charleston. Regina Marler, who has been here many, many times, is a nonfiction writer whose books include Bloomsbury Pie and Queer Beats. She has edited the selected letters of Vanessa Bell and writes for the New York Review of Books and other journals.
I was going to say, I've missed human faces, so even though you're masked, it's such a delight to see you all. And I've spent weeks immersed in your work, and I'm so excited to talk with you. As usual, I have my scrappy little notes. I aspire to 3x5 cards. That's for next year. So Esquire described you as our most eloquent and faithful chronicler of human desire, which is not bad. But you also used to write for Golf magazine, and I know that won't seem like a conflict
I love
to some of you. So let's talk a little about your path from one thing to another, and then maybe you'll read to us.
Sure. First of all, I've only been in Charleston for about a day, and it's already one of my favorite cities I've ever been to. So thank you for having me. I was always, I always wanted to write, and I always wrote, but my first real writing job out of college was at Golf magazine. And then, as now, there was a heavy imposter syndrome going on where I was pretending to know about golf. I didn't know anything about golf, but I was going to like Augusta National, the Masters. I was going to, just every single amazing golf high holy ground in the world. And not knowing what I was doing. But, several years later, I did figure out what I was doing. And it was, so I started writing at Golf Magazine, and then I started writing for Esquire, and then I wrote, I spent a decade on 3 Women, and the rest is Animal.
Yeah. You made your way slowly toward, well, I would say that your two big themes are sort of sex and grief.
Yes.
And you made your way into...
And golf.
And they're mixed in. They're all in the same plane.
Exactly.
Really.
Exactly.
So did you read Gay Tallis and think, I'd like to write a female version of this? What brought you toward writing and thinking about desire?
So my editor, Simon & Schuster, who's the one who gave me the sort of contract for 3 Women, said to me that he wanted me to write a book about basically anything that I wanted to write about, which was really cool and also completely, haunting. And he sent me several books, and among them were like Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff and Gay Talis's Thy Neighbor's Wife. And what I really liked about Thy Neighbor's Wife, I thought desire, I was living in New York at the time. I had lost my parents. I was sort of single and living in Manhattan and talking to friends about, guys and girls and just all sorts of, just the trials and tribulations of being alone in New York City. And I was so intrigued by love and desire, and reading Thy Neighbor's Wife. I loved the idea of spending a decent amount of time on one person. And that's kind of where the idea for it came from. Not so much that it would be a book about desire, but that it would be a book about people, and that I would spend a lot of time on a small number of them.
Okay, so you intended it to be kind of immersive.
Yes.
When you set out.
Correct.
And it was a larger topic initially, right? You thought you would write about men as well.
Yeah.
Initially.
Yeah. At first, I thought it was going to be my proposal was quite different from what the book ended up being. It was like, I'm going to talk to all these people who have done all these. It was far-flung and wide-reaching, and I did. I talked to a lot of people, and I talked to a lot of men, and I never stopped talking to men for the book. But it got to a point where every woman that I was talking to was just kind of giving me more information, more truth. I mean, one of the first people that I interviewed for the book was my brother, because it was easy. I was like, and it's hard to get people to talk to you about sex. So I was like, well, your family has to help you. My brother we had both been very traumatized by the deaths of our parents. And my brother turned to sort of video games in the middle of the night. He's older than me, so he was like a married podiatrist with 3 kids. And he would just play video games all night long. And
so the distraction was his
exactly,
path through
exactly.
it.
But no shock to some people here, I would imagine his wife left him after a number of those nights of him playing Warhawk with 14-year-old boys till 4 o'clock in the morning. And
so it was not as benign a
it
distraction
was not.
as
No,
he
it wasn't.
thought it would be.
It wasn't.
Set up like.
Exactly. And she left him for her personal trainer, who was 15 years her junior.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, this is good for the book. So I interviewed him for many, many months, and we would talk, and he would tell me everything, his whole life story. And one of the things I noticed with my brother, with many of the men I spoke to, but my brother in very particular, was that even though he was my brother, there was still an element of him wanting to present as a kind of Lothario, like there was still an ego involved. And I think that's just one of the pitfalls of, being a female writer and talking to, it just kind of depends what and who you are, and what and who you're talking to, in a sense. And so it just turned out that talking to women was a lot more revealing and a lot more complex and a lot more interesting and a lot more honest.
So you didn't find that that performative aspect, that you did when you were interviewing some of the men.
Yes, women were very rarely performative. They were much more seeking of figuring out an answer, like with me, kind of a thing, which was really exciting, not just for the writing of it, but also just for the human connection of it. It was like, I love problem solving, and if someone's like, how do I get this guy? I'm like, all right. So there was a lot of that, and it was, that was fun.
And it was a process of many years, and you would actually move to be closer to some of the women you ended up writing about in more detail.
Yeah.
So.
I moved to, the first place I moved to was Indiana. I moved to be near the Kinsey Institute, which was where they study sex, and I was like, it just felt like, kind of throwing a dart at the U.S. map and going, okay. But I moved to, because mainly I moved out of New York because living in New York and trying to write a book about the country was kind of impossible, because New York is both sort of the antithesis of America and the epitome of it in so many different ways. And also it was just difficult for me as a human in the world to kind of, my friends would always just be like, let's go out. And I'm like, I'm writing. And they're like, okay, whatever, let's go out. It's not a real job. So I moved to Indiana.
It's an interesting kind of...
Is that an Indiana fan? Or is that an anti-New York?
I was looking for similar books, and there aren't a lot. There are a lot of sex guides and sometimes some sociological studies and so forth. But I was thinking about Nancy Friday's 1973 book on women's sexual fantasies. Maybe somebody in the audience has heard of My Secret Garden. And in the intro she wrote that in trying to understand what it is to be a woman, neither nationality nor class helps to define us so much as the honesty of our feelings about ourselves and our desires.
That's exactly it.
And you ended up with these three women subjects who were very honest with you, very, very open, and in a way that's by default, because if the people you're talking with weren't especially open, that wouldn't go so far. But it's really very striking, how trusting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I did, I was never a great reporter in a way, because I never wanted to feel invasive. And I never wanted to, unless I was doing political stories and things like that, that was different. But when you're talking to quote unquote regular people, I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable ever. And so one of the things I would say would be like, let's just talk like friends, albeit with a tape recorder. But let's just talk for as long as you want to. And then when it's over, and you can sort of say, strike this, strike that, or strike the whole thing. And a couple of people took me up on that, which made for which is one reason why it took so long. But ultimately, I never felt dirty doing it, because I did it in a way that made me feel moral.
Well, you really hung out with them in a way that it's not just a
close.
professional
Right.
relationship.
Exactly.
And in the introduction, interestingly, you make it clear it's nonfiction, and the variety of sources that you're using. So it's not just the interviews; it's you going to the places that they describe. They describe a tryst with the lover at the river. You go to the river, and you immerse yourself in that.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting and
It was
powerful.
fun. It was fun to do. It was fun, like with Lena, the thing you're talking about. For those of you who haven't read Three Women, there's a woman named Lena who is a housewife in rural Indiana, and she was married with 2 kids, and she had this love affair with her high school boyfriend, and they would meet at this place called The River, which is where they used to meet when they were kids. And she would go and meet with him, and they would have their intimate encounters. And then I would be waiting at this little winery down the road, and she would come and tell me like right afterwards. And then we would go there together, and she would like show me where it had happened, so I could like really, you know. And it sounds whatever. It sounds maybe crazy, but it was fun.
It sounds fascinating.
And it was fun for her because it's like, you know, when you're really into something like that.
Yeah.
One, it was you know, she couldn't. It was verboten. She couldn't tell anybody else about it. And two, you know, you want to shout those things from the rooftops, and to be able to be like, and then we did it here, and we did this there, and it's like, it's exciting. And for me, so she wanted to divulge, and I wanted to listen. So it was kind of a really perfect marriage.
It's very symbiotic, absolutely.
Totally.
Oh, wow. So it's being made into a movie as we speak, a show. When you were writing, did you have any sense of its filmic potential?
No, I don't know. I didn't think many people were going to read it.
Oh.
So, yeah.
So it's surprising. It's surprising.
Yeah, it was a surprise. It was a fun surprise.
It is. And you aside from one of your figures in the book, whose name is part of the public record, and so she's named. Your characters are anonymous, which it was probably freeing for them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Gates Elise, who for a short amount of time was my unofficial mentor on the project, one of the things he said to me was that I could not use real names. I mean, I'm sorry, that I had to use real names.
Oh.
And, you know, he had written his book back in 1980 when there was no real internet to speak of, but I was sort of like, oh, I have to use real names. If I don't use real names, I'm a hack. And so I was telling people I'm going to use real names, blah blah blah. So even the women who are in the book, they were okay with me using their real names. I ended up deciding not to do it for the two of them who were not a public record, who had not already been, you know, because I was so aware of what would happen on the internet and how people would, you know, it even got, even just in the, you know, the time that I was reporting the book, it got even worse with, you know, you can't do anything without, like the second you know, you just Google, everyone's entire past is a Google search away.
So this was a protective gesture on your part. Yeah. I think it's interesting. It's kind of reflective of how close you grew to these women, that they weren't a wonderful story to you. Although these are wonderful stories, they're moving and they're fascinating. And I noticed that it's not, we say it's a book about desire, about, you know, women's desire, but it's about desire within relationships. It's about really specific directed desire rather than, say, a book about fantasy. And it's also very much about transgressive desire. I guess that's where the story is.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think so much of desire is transgressive, and it's just transgressive by the very nature of, you know, it's almost like, I don't know, I feel like desire is more exciting to people. Sometimes we make desire transgressive just to, you know, live in it a little bit more excitingly. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I was talking with friends about an experimental phase in their relationship, and my friend said that what was so good about it is that it was secret.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a powerful thing.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. So I haven't said anything about Animal, but would you like to read from both books? Maybe we can kind of talk about it. We'll take from there.
Yeah, I'm going to read a small passage from Three Women that Lena, the woman I was talking about in Indiana, this is when she is, when she's in high school, and I think she's 15, and she's kind of looking forward to her first kiss with the man, with the boy that eventually will be the man that she's going to have this illicit relationship with. And they're going to a movie. The boys have already purchased the tickets, so the four of them walk into the theater. The two girls sit next to each other, and Rod goes to sit on the other side of Jennifer, and Aiden sits beside Lena. She feels the heat of his body beside her, and she has to concentrate very hard on acting normal. She is grateful that they arrived late at the movie, that the house lights have already dimmed, so that he won't see her red face, her pimples, her exultation. Seven is not Lena's kind of movie. It's bloody and carnal, and at the scene where the man who's guilty of lust is forced to have sex with a woman wearing a strap-on that will mutilate her, Lena cannot take it. Her discomfort is greater than her desire to be sitting next to Aiden, so she rises from the seat, and wordlessly he does too. She walks outside with the very triumphant feeling that this boy is going to follow behind. It's never been like this for her before. She has been a gray mouse in her bedroom. She walks faster and hears him picking up his pace, and then he calls her the name that will haunt her dreams. Hey, kid, wait up. You okay? She turns. They are under the light of the marquee. Suddenly it feels like 1957. Packards are pulling up and Cary Grant is saying, "Hello, gorgeous," and Betty Davis is saying, "Yoo-hoo, lady, over here." He catches her arm. She turns to him. "Did you just call me kid?" "Yeah." "Well, we're in the same grade." "Yeah." So you don't like it?" "No," she says, smiling wide. "I like it. I like it so much." And that's when it happens, the most romantic kiss in the history of the world. He moves his palm to her cheek slowly and unsurely, like the boy that he still is, even though he's more of a man than anyone else she knows, and she gets hot across her whole face. She sees 1,000 images the way it's supposed to be when you die and not for your first kiss. She sees her mother at the foot of the stairs calling her lazy, and she sees her father walking out the door. He keeps walking out the door, and the door keeps closing behind him, and her mother is saying, "Lena, clean up your filthy mess. Lena, what are you going on about? Lena, why are you up there? Are you still in the damn bathroom?" And she sees her sisters narrowing their eyes at her, and she sees her pet rabbit that died in the night. And in the morning, her mother made her scoop it out, and she wanted to bury it, but she sees the trash bag with the twisty ties. And she sees her father walking out the door, and then all of a sudden, this beautiful man's lips are on her lips. She feels his tongue slip inside her mouth, and it's something she's only imagined and read about in a book she and a friend shared called How to Kiss, which talked about tongues moving around like goldfish, but her tongue and his tongue are not goldfish. They are not tongues, but actual souls moving against the wet bone of teeth. Lena feels that she could die right now, that if she did, her life would be complete. "Aiden," she whispers into his mouth. "What's up, kid?"
That's terrific. Thank you very much. One of the things that I find powerful about the book and about the women's, well, I'll say this, it's that they are not just describing what happened. It's not just a narrative, even with the ups and downs of narratives. I think that the way they can, desires are reaching out, but part of what's powerful about this is that it's reflective. They're constantly talking about themselves in desire, and themselves in relationship. They're very self-critical often. They hate themselves, they hate their bodies, and all these other things, but they are compelled often by desire, and then they examine that compulsion. So there's this constant interplay, and I think that's a really wonderful thing that adds so much, and you're very much in their minds when that's going on.
Oh yeah, I mean, I attribute everything about that book to the bravery of the women who not only told me their stories, but did so in such an honest way. And you know, their stories they're not exactly, you know, they're not exactly outlandish. What's outlandish about them is the fact that they are all of our stories, and that we don't always realize that, and that it takes someone really being honest about themselves for someone else to be able to go, "Oh, okay, I see myself in that. I see that too." And yeah, I mean, I was just really grateful to have that connection.
It's hard for me to imagine, but you were actually writing this while you were writing fiction short fiction and the novel, right? So you had these 3 projects going with this. I can't say they're unrelated. They're not unrelated, but they're like the prism shifts in each of them. So were you, tell me something about the timeline and when you were developing this, and were you were writing fiction primarily? You were in an MFA program at one point.
So I had always, there's never been a time where I haven't like written short stories or you know, the first 40 pages of a novel. So I was always writing, but I researched 3 women over the course of about a decade. I got married, I had a baby, and I felt like, oh shit, I'm gonna turn in this book that I've been spending a decade on. I'm gonna have no money, nothing, so I better do some other stuff, you know, just in case. So I went to Boston University and I got my MFA at their program. And while I was there, I was doing the edits on 3 women, and that's where I wrote Animal and the collection that's coming out next summer, Ghost Lover.
Yeah. So how is it shifting between nonfiction, short form fiction, long fiction?
I love it. I love doing, I mean, that's not fair. I don't love it. No, I love the freedom of going from one thing to the next. I think that writing fiction and nonfiction concurrently, or reading fiction while writing nonfiction, or reading nonfiction while writing fiction, I think is a really dynamic way of opening up your creativity and sort of, I think when you're reading or writing nonfiction while reading or writing fiction, I think helps you keep the truth in your fiction. And I think that reading fiction while writing nonfiction helps you keep the fun and sort of, you know, being able to break the rules in your nonfiction.
Are you primarily deadline driven, or do you wake up and say, today's a fiction day?
You know, being busy doing all the stuff I'm doing now is obviously, like everything else in life, both a blessing and a curse. So it's really nice to know that, you know, that I have someone who will receive what I write. You know, there was a long time where I wrote into the ether, which is very scary, and it was like, why are you doing this anyway? Nobody cares. But now it's like I have to be more regimented now because I have deadlines, and so so now I'm deadline driven. There was a time when I was a little bit more like, today, perhaps. Yes, it's not like that anymore.
Tell me a little bit about the production. Where is it being filmed, and your role in that process and so forth?
So we are filming 3 women. It's going to be a limited series for Showtime. We're filming it in and around upstate New York is going to sort of sub in for Fargo and Indiana. We also have a stage in Long Island City, and we're going to do some road stuff too. We're going to do a cross-country trip like the one that I did, and we're also going to do some stuff in Italy and Hawaii.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. And so you are executive producing, you are
So
creative.
I've written about half the episodes, and I am involved in the day-to-day decision-making of, you know, casting it and deciding who wears what, which is probably my favorite part. I pretend it's not. I'm like, oh, I don't know, whatever you guys want. I'm like, the pink one. So I'm involved in a lot of it, and it's really, it's a lot of work. It's incredibly frightening, but it's also, you know, it's also really amazing. Like Betty Gilpin is playing Lena, and I just watched the scene that she did today, and she's just absolutely phenomenal. She's like a phenomenal actor, I feel like. She's just beyond. But to see her embody this person that I knew, and she has not met the real Lena, but she has embodied her in such a way that it's really beautiful. And everyone that's on the team, that's in the cast and on the crew, has a really deep respect for the women who are the subjects, that it feels really good.
And you have a female director.
Yes, all of our directors are female. We have, I think, 6 directors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So
because we have 10 episodes. But our first the director for the first couple of episodes is a Danish woman named Louise Friedberg, who's absolutely beyond. She's going to make it look insane.
Well, I think it would be great if you read from Animal, and we could talk about the novel. This movie Rights for This have also sold,
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's very exciting.
Okay. Slightly different.
Yeah.
If someone asked me to describe myself in a single word, depraved is the one I would use. The deprivation has been useful to me. Useful to what end I couldn't say, but I have survived the worst. Survivor is the second word I'd use. A dark death thing happened to me when I was a child. I will tell you all about it, but first I want to tell you what followed the evening that changed the course of my life. I'll do it this way so that you may withhold your sympathy, or maybe you won't have any sympathy at all. That's fine with me. What's more important is dispelling several misconceptions about women mostly. I don't want you to continue the cycle of hate. I've been called a whore. I've been judged not only by the things I've done unto others, but cruelly by the things that have happened to me. I envied the people who judged me, those who lived their lives in a neat, predictable manner. The right college, the right house, the right time to move to a bigger one. The prescribed number of children, which sometimes is 2 and other times is 3. I would bet that most of those people had not been through 1% of what I had. But what made me lose my mind was when those people called me a sociopath. Some even said it like it was a positive. I am someone who believes she knows which people should be dead and which should be alive. I am a lot of things, but I am not a sociopath. When Vic shot a hole in himself, the blood leaked out like liquor. I hadn't seen blood like that since I was 10 years old. It opened a portal. I saw the reflection of my past in that blood. I saw the past clearly for the first time. The cops came to the restaurant looking horny. Everyone had been cleared out of the place. The man I'd been eating with asked me if I would be okay. He was putting his jacket on. He meant would I be okay alone tonight and for the rest of my life because I would never see him again. Once he'd asked me who my group was, and I didn't know what he meant, and now I did. The dead man on the floor was my group. I was part of a group that Dartmouth didn't recognize. After the cops left, I walked home to my apartment. I thought I had no carbohydrates in the house, but I found a taco kit. The worst thing about eating too much is you need more Klonopin than usual. I got just high enough to be decisive. I decided I was going to find her. Vic was probably cold by then. I pictured his cold tentacles. When someone suffocates you with what they believe is love, even as you feel your air supply being cut off, you at least feel embraced. When Vic died, I was completely alone. I didn't have the energy to make someone else love me. I was inert. Fuata, a word my mother would have used. She always had the best words. There was one person left, a woman I'd never met. This was terrifying because women had never loved me. I was not a woman whom other women love. She lived in Los Angeles, a city I didn't understand. Mauve stucco, criminals, and glitter. I didn't think Alice, that was her name, would love me, but I hoped she would at least want to see me. I'd known her name for years. I was almost positive that she didn't know mine. For the first time in a long time, I was going somewhere for a reason. I had no idea how it would go in California. I didn't know if I would fuck or love or hurt someone. I knew I'd wait for a call. I knew I would be rabid. I had $0, but didn't rule out the prospect of a swimming pool. There were many paths my journey would take. I didn't think any of them would lead me to murder.
It's so concise and so propulsive, and you move so far from one place to another in 2 or 3 pages. One of the things that's so intoxicating about the book is that it begins with such a hardness and bitterness, almost like a noir, and then it opens up into the tenderness of the friendship that she finds with Alice when she gets to Los Angeles. And then, of course, that it doesn't go well. But it goes so many different places that you're not expecting. And I found that really wonderful.
Thank you.
But there's a lot of there's a lot of sex, but it is primarily it's about grief, and it's about female rage. What made rage come to the fore for you? Something that had to be written about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, there's a lot of personal stuff to Animal, and the main personal aspect of it is the grief. I had lost my parents, not the way that the woman in Animal loses hers, which is very kind of violent. But what struck me so much about loss, and my loss in specific, is that people don't really understand loss unless they've lost something pretty big. And it's hard to communicate how bad something hurts. And I think the same thing is true if you lose a pet or something. You know, loss is relative. It's relative to how much something meant to you. And I've always found it really difficult to communicate that to other people. And for me, with Animal, you know, when I lost my parents, it felt like I had been bitten, like I'd been mauled to death by a tiger, but nobody could see that. Yeah. You know, I was sort of presenting normally. And so Animal was a kind of like, this is how it actually feels. And when it comes to rage, I find that rage is a much more valuable tool and emotion than grief, because grief is kind of very, you know, it's an imploding emotion.
That's right.
It's
It's
just
the
like,
inwardness, the gesture.
just kind of like,
Yeah.
Whereas rage, you can kind of like, you can find someone out in the world who has done something, and you
Transfer
can
that.
go, I'm just gonna put it on
Yeah.
you. It feels so much better. So for me, you know, but rage also, the rage in Animal is also part of, you know, not just women, every marginalized person in the world has been made to feel a certain way, and then made to feel like when they get angry about it, that they're kind of, you know, then they get tagged as crazy or, you know,
Other, dangerous.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that made me angry also.
Yeah.
So there's that in it too, the idea of sort of like, you know, if you don't conform to society in a certain way, you get tagged in a way that, so because people are trying to stop you from, you know, from like, our society only kind of exists if we keep layers of people down. And that made me angry.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to talk about something that comes up in Animal. It's even in Three Women, and it's also in your short stories, but I wanted to talk about style for a moment. You have a gift for metaphor, and a gift for a kind of a snappy style of metaphor that we often see in comedy.
Oh.
There's a kind of there's a little 1-2 punch, and I have an example from a story called 42. You'll see this is set up like a joke. The more a man didn't want her, the more her vagina tingled. It was like a fish that tried to pan-fry itself. So it is right on the edge of comedy. But then it turns on itself, and it ends with this kind of self-deprecating, you know, cynical inwardness. And so, do you think if your life had been a little different, if you hadn't lost your parents and so forth, do you think that you could have gone toward comedy more openly?
I don't know, it's such an interesting question. I don't know. I love that. I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I never really thought about that, but I do think humor is such a vital part of even the darkest things. I think that, you know, without it, it's just kind of like, because I like writing about really dark stuff, but there has to be a reprieve in there. And that's something I'm always like looking at, like when we're doing the show, it's like, even if there's something, I love to have moments of hilarity and like absolutely gothic situations. I find it really enlivening.
It is true too, isn't it? They're
Exactly.
always interwoven.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally.
And sometimes we, you know, for reasons of artistic purity or something, I think we're going to spoil the mood
Exactly.
if we leaven it.
Exactly.
But the leavening is more real.
Yeah.
Well, I think it might be time for a few questions from our audience. I can't see very well.
I know,
so
the light is
I
like,
hope that people
really.
will raise hands and wave them violently around. I have two on the right, 2 or 3 on the right, and we have a couple microphones that will circulate. And stand, please, when you ask a question, because partly because we can't see you, but also. Let's start over here. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a great discussion. I one time interviewed a woman named Helen Fisher, who is one of the great social scientists who's researched love and sex. And I asked her a question that I'm a doctor and I've often been asked this, if one's marriage is dead, can you revive it? And she said, oh yes. It was an interesting response. She said, oh yes, but what you have to do is search for novelty. She said novelty stimulates dopamine, and dopamine increases the feeling of love. And she said, so, you know, when people are dating, the woman kind of intuitively knows she has to wear a different dress every time, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And ever since that thought, I've been interested, or that comment, I've been interested in this kind of braiding together of the search for novelty and desire. And, and so my question, all that preamble boils down to a simple question, which was, what was the role of boredom and monotony in the women you interviewed, driving them towards desire and adventure and secrecy?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly, I think what's really interesting and something that which doctor did you mention? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Helen Fisher? I spoke to I actually worked with one of her cohorts, Justin Garcia at Kinsey. And I didn't work with Helen, but a lot of her stuff I've absorbed. So it's really, and she's brilliant. And one of the things that I learned from Justin and from other people at Kinsey, and also Esther Perel is fantastic with that stuff, is that men's infidelity is kind of the one that we've talked. It's the thing that is the most, talked about and the most historical. But women actually are looking for that novelty a lot more. Men are kind of, it's not so much about it's kind of what's right in front of them. Women are kind of like, where's my story? Where's my love story?
Yeah.
And where's my secret exciting? I mean, I think that's why a movie like Unfaithful, which is one of my favorites with Diane Lane, and movies like that and books like that, and it's so much truer that I think women are looking for that novelty. And as to what one of the things that Esther Perel says too that I think is really interesting is that women spend a lot of time in their formative years kind of wanting safety and wanting someone who's going to settle down and be with them. But then the second they have that, they're like, oh, this is not what I was having a lot more fun when I was like freaking out about not getting a text. And it's true. I think that's true. And I think in terms of, I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's something that I think it's helpful to know that about oneself, and to have that kind of like, and the knowledge that actually it might, Stephanie Danler, who is a friend of mine, the woman who wrote Sweet Bitter and Stray, she said something, and I don't want to butcher her words, but it's something to the effect of infidelity. Cheating is like the same play over and over again, but with like different actors. And when you start thinking about it in like those terms, you're like, do I really want to get into all that? Like, do I really want? It's a lot of like, and so I find that really, I find to find the novelty with the person that you're with is it's a long, hard road, but I think ultimately it's less messy.
We are always. Yes. That search for novelty shows up in fiction too. I remember I read years ago an interview with Jodie Foster, who had done, I think right out of Yale, she did an internship at Esquire.
Oh.
And they had her reading the slush pile, which means the unsolicited fiction that comes in. And so these were people who were not necessarily professional writers, but they wanted to get their work into Esquire. Mm-hmm. And she said that she started to be able to sort them into male authors and female by what happened in the stories. And she said, in the women's stories, they had this tired life, but suddenly, through a window they caught a glimpse of the pool boy, something like this. Yeah. But in men's stories, it was a quiet evening at home, and just a little TV, and he goes to bed early. But then his wife comes through the bedroom door, and she's in a corset.
Yeah.
So it's just the wife, but she's different.
That's really interesting.
Or it's the different person.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. Okay, another question. We have something down here. Row 2, I think. All right, we're through there. Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah. As a second wave feminist, I found this book, well, first of all, it's a fascinating, brilliant book. I'm talking now about 3 women, but I found it a very tough read. Mm. I mean, all of these women seem to have lost control of their romantic life. They've ceded control to the men. And the men call the shots. The men call the tune. They deliver heartbreak and pain. And the women seem very passive to me. But that's not what feminism was all about. It was about full empowerment. And I was very disturbed by that. And I didn't know what your read on this was.
It's
interesting. There's a long tradition, women are supposed to be the choosers in love. Mm-hmm. Darwin said sexual selection depends on the will of the female. Mm-hmm. And yet women don't have this anymore, and yet look where we're going in the workplace, look where we're going in public life, and yet we seem to be backtracking in terms of sexual power. I'd be interested in your thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, for starters, what I will say, and I'll use Lena as my example because Lena's this housewife in Indiana. She grew up intensely Catholic. Infidelity was not something that was okay. As a young woman, she was raped by 3 different young boys at a party, and that kind of sort of colored her. And sexual trauma happens to 1 in 3 women, maybe more. That's the amount that talks about it. So we already have that legacy that's there and that has been there since the dawn of time, and maybe hopefully will lessen, but for now it's still like that. But Lena, after decades, after beginning her first sexual experience with a rape and then having a marriage with a man who didn't kiss her for over a decade, reconnects with her high school lover, and what that young woman over there was just saying about the idea of novelty, and what Regina was saying, and Jodie Foster, who by whatever the word is, Lena was doing all that because she wanted to, and this man who was not fully giving himself to her because he had his own marriage, she wasn't like, it wasn't like he was like, come here now. She was the one doing everything, machinating an entire system, getting pizza for a babysitter, getting a babysitter at the last minute, using her last dollar bill on a motel. That's the power of a woman, I think, getting what she wants. Now, just because the man is the one that she wants, it's not really the man she wants, it's this new, different life. And she's doing it in a way that she is selecting the man. She selected him in high school. She selected him again when she was older. The other woman in 3 Women, Sloane, who is an entrepreneur, her husband and her have, an open marriage, and she has sex with other people in front of him. And she's confused as to sort of where it's his desire and where his begins and where her ends and vice versa. But she's still in control of it. And at the end of the day, with Sloane, one of the things that I always found so striking was that she said, my husband think I am his sexual fantasy. And even if he has fantasies about other women, if he has fantasies about a supermodel or, a porn, I'm in there. Like, I'm always. And so she was in control of that too. And then the other story in Three Women is a young woman who had a relationship with her teacher when she was underage. And, in that, there's obviously she's a victim of an older man doing something. But at the same time, and the thing that we're doing in the TV show that I want to be very careful about is showing what was her love story. This is her first experience of love. And okay, so it's, wrong. There's wrong and right are like, we build these terms around things. We even use the word feminism to describe the way that women should be, which I think is another kind of form of imprisonment of women also. I think that calling women victims is incredibly victimizing, and I think that the best thing we can do for each other is to listen to each other's desires and go like, oh, that's cool, because that just makes people happy.
I do see agency.
Yeah, exactly.
In each of these women's cases, even though Maggie's, which I sometimes had to skip, it was so painful.
Yeah.
You're right, it's her love story, though. In an inappropriate relationship of that sort, and that's one of the terms that we use now for this kind of thing, you would say she doesn't really have the kind of choices she appeared to have, to herself or to the man. But that's the beginning of her romantic life.
Yeah.
It's the,
Yeah.
those feelings are real.
For better or worse, it's the beginning,
Yes.
and to sort of, to call it names and to put it in a box and to put, everything that happens to her in a sort of like, in a holding room without giving her the agency to describe the love and excitement she felt, which is still there. And it's like when we go back, in our, we don't really, if you think about the things that you regret and don't regret, I mean, when you're like getting to a point where all you have are your memories, and even the bad ones, you're like, oh, that was kind of an interesting time. And, I think I think when it comes to sex and desire, especially when we get old, I always think about Robert Angel, who was at the New Yorker for a very long time, wrote a story called Old, about getting older, and he said that no matter what, we're still inside 17-year-old boys and girls with red lips. And I think that's so beautiful and so true.
It is. I think sometimes, and I was thinking about the issue of agency while reading, I think sometimes it seems they have less agency because they cannot make the things happen for themselves that they want. These are tragic stories to some extent. Certainly, Sloane's is at least ambivalent and very sad in some ways, and she hurts people she doesn't intend to hurt or isn't really thinking of. But the power of the desire, acting on the desire, that's there.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't make a happy ending.
Yeah.
So that's one difference. Okay, who else have we got here? Down in front, about row 4.
Hi. I have a question on how would you say that you would, build language? Because I think both of your books, the way that you write is so witty and so quick and so to the point. I would just like to hear kind of what advice you would have for aspiring authors.
Oh gosh, I have so much. Talk later. No, I just because I spent so much time trying to figure out how to make it in the business. So it's all I think. I'm like, how can I help? Reading obviously is, I think, the number one thing. Reading a lot, and my other thing that I've always held true to that I really think is so important is just getting something out, whether it's a short story or a draft of a novel or whatever it is, whatever you write and want to write, it's finishing it and sending it to somebody who can do something with it, or sending it to 500 people who can do something with it, because sometimes it's really hard to find somebody to and not letting any rejection stop you.
Yeah. There's nothing like the power of a completed draft.
It's true. It really
Yeah.
is. There's so many incomplete. There's nothing worse
Yeah.
than someone going, "Hey, I have this idea," or "I have
Yeah.
the first 10 pages." It's like, no,
Exactly.
just
That's not-
finish
go
it.
home. Yeah.
Finish it, and then send it to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Right in the front here. Oh, wait, am I missing something? Upstairs? Thank you.
Quick question. Were there historic women novelists who were your references or precedents? Such as Edith Wharton, Jane Austen? I don't know.
No, not those two. More Elena Ferrante, Natalia Ginsburg, Flora Jaggi, more of this Grace Paley, Joy Williams, a short story writer. I was much more. I love reading historical novels like those, but those were not my personal models for my writing.
Okay, let's see, maybe down here in front. Oh, okay.
Thank you. First of all, I've not read your books, but I look forward to doing that. Would you clarify again how you identified these individuals, and did the three come out of a larger group whom you considered, and what has happened to these three women since you wrote this book?
Oh, that's a really good question.
So I found, yes, they came out of a larger group. I never stopped talking to. I took to hundreds of people for the book. So these three were kind of the ones that I talked to for the longest. But they came out of a larger group. I met the woman Lena in Indiana after moving to Indiana and starting a women's discussion group. I met Maggie, who's the young woman in North Dakota who had the alleged relationship with her teacher. When I read an article in a local newspaper in near Fargo about her, and I went and drove to meet her and her mother the next day, because all these people were calling her a liar, and what I noticed were that there was all these phone calls after midnight with her and this teacher, and I was like, my mother always said to me, nothing good happens after midnight, so that, and she was not right, because a lot of good things happen after midnight. But then the third woman, Sloan, the woman who's having the open relationship, I moved into her town, and I met her through, I was planning on writing about other people in the town, and then somebody said, oh, you have to meet Sloan. So that's how I met those three in particular. And the women now, so Maggie is a consultant on the Showtime show, and she's doing really great. She's a social worker. We talk almost every day, and she's a very close person in my life. Alina in Indiana is no longer with her husband or Aiden, the man she was with in the book. She's with a new man. She's doing great, and Sloan is still happily married.
Did the men in the book, three women, know that they were being written about?
Sloane's husband did. Lena's lover did not. Lena's husband did. And Maggie, the teacher who she had the relationship with, I contacted him multiple times, and he didn't get back to me, because he was the only, because I was naming real names in that story, his was the only male voice that I was interested in having, because I was going to be talking about something that he allegedly did. And since everybody else was going to be anonymous, I wasn't that concerned. And I really wanted to tell the women's stories in the way that they saw the things, rather than a 360-degree view.
You said, you talked to many women on and choosing these three. Did you talk to very many women of color, and did you find that their relationships were similar to the three white women, or were there differences that made you want to stay away from ethnicities?
No, I mean, there were many I spoke to many women and men of color, and also people of different sexual orientations. One of the woman who might have been a fourth woman, if there had been a fourth woman, would have been a woman in Los Angeles who I moved to LA for, who was originally from Dominica and was a really striking human being. But she was one of the people who, after I moved to LA and spent 6 months talking to her, she didn't want to be in the book anymore. So that was difficult. So no, there was no sort of selecting based on anything, ethnicity-wise or otherwise. The selection was purely based on who gave me the most. After those 3 or 4 women, the first draft of the book was about 20 people, with some men in there, like 3 or 4, I think. And when my editor and I were going through the book, we just kept sort of going, oh, you just want to get to Maggie again or Lena again. So it was really a matter of who had given the most honest. And to answer the other part of your question, I don't find that there's really, there's differences of relationships. It's not just ethnicity or anything. It's person to person, socioeconomic to every window dressing is completely different. But ultimately, the feelings of wanting to love and be loved were so stratospherically the same from person to person that I was just looking for someone to tell me as specifically as possible their experiences.
One quick question. I'm sorry to cut people off. One quick question.
Obviously, you got really close with these women and they confided a lot in you. I was wondering if they ever came to you for any advice or guidance and how comfortable you were sharing any of that, or if you really wanted to remain like a bystander, just kind of let these situations unfold in real time, naturally, without any input on your part.
Yeah, that's a really good question. They did ask me for advice, particularly Lena, because she was trying to sort of get this guy, in a sense, and it was like I was her closest girlfriend. I didn't want to give her advice for 2 reasons. One, I didn't want to affect the trajectory of her story in any way. I didn't want my presence to be a factor in anything. And 2, I find that especially with advice on love, that nobody ever takes it anyway. So there was no point. What I would do, though, is I would just share my own experiences that were similar. I would say, well, I know that when I felt that way, I did X, Y, Z. And we would just talk about it like in sort of that, that larger thing. I think giving advice is, it's difficult and fraught. And I think sometimes the advice giver really has to nail down what they're doing and what their sort of goal is. Because I think it's kind of like, therapists don't often give advice, even though that's the only reason I've ever wanted to go to one, just for someone to tell me what to do. But yeah, I didn't for those 2 reasons.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Lisa,
much,
you're
Regina.
wonderful. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming. I really, really appreciate it.